Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today I have Tori Tecken with me from Tori Talks. If you are familiar with her channel, if not, go check it out. Go to the links in the description below, check out her channel. And she's an author. She's doing double duty on the book front. So definitely go check her out. And we've got some questions for you today, but we also have some people in the chat. Hi, Josh. And Rob, nice to see you. Joe.
My month launch buddy, Rob Lee or
Oh,
Lay. I'm not sure if
yes.
I'm
Path later.
but
Right?
yeah. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Making sure it's the right Rob Lee. Sometimes there's multiple people with the same name.
Dan, that makes me so happy.
Hello, Katie.
Hi, Katie.
All right. So, Tori, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, your books quickly, and then we'll dive into these questions. And fair warning, everyone, I had a lot of questions. So grab your tea, grab your coffee, grab whatever you want. Buckle in.
I mean, I'm here. I'm excited. So first of all, Kay, thank you so much for having me on your channel. As you know, I adore your channel and you. So I was very excited to get to do my first official Bloodstones interview with you, which was very exciting. Anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Tori. I run the channel Tori Talks too, and am a fantasy enthusiast, have been since I was a kid. And I am the author of Phased, which is a dark supernatural urban fantasy. And now The Bloodstones, which is my foray into epic fantasy. It is the first book in a trilogy called Legends of the Bruhai, and it is coming out November 28th. I think I covered everything.
Nice.
I think I got it down.
That's like the cleanest elevator pitch.
I've been working on it.
So we also have
Brian.
Brian in here. We've got Matt, Chris. Well, we got all the folks in here today. Thanks for checking in, everyone. So congratulations on the upcoming book. I am so excited
I am getting like the official doesn't have the giant Amazon proof tape around it.
It looks so good.
I'm so thrilled with it. I'm really thrilled with it.
100%, Matt. 100%. I'm actually planning to reread it because I was very lucky enough to be able to beta read it. So after I beta read it, I was like, yeah, I'm going to read that again. Once it's like published out in the world, I'm going to read that again. So if that says anything, please go check it out and pre-order.
Well, and for everybody who cares about this, look at that beautiful floppy paperback.
Okay, I sold. Yeah,
I know,
I was
right?
sold before, but that's like my weakness.
Same. I love a floppy paperback.
Hello, Daniel, Francois. We've got lots of people in the chat. Thanks for stopping in. So we're going to go ahead with the questions, but if you all have questions as well, pop them in the chat. We'll get to them as we can throughout. So let's start off with what you're reading.
I actually prepared for this. Sometimes I leave my book over on my nightstand, but I am currently reading Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, which is a very short little essay kind of collection about the women artists back in a time when women artists were not encouraged to be women artists, basically is my pitch for that. And it's been very interesting and thought-provoking. Definitely a swerve from my usual chonky reads. And then I am just about to start a fantasy buddy read of Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, which I'm also very excited about.
I'm so happy. Message me when you start that because that's one of my favorites.
I'm very excited.
And we have Andrew here as well, fashionably early as always.
Love it. I'm actually buddy reading Shadow of the Gods with Andrew, so.
Oh, you get a pass, Andrew. I'm sorry, you're working. That's even more exciting. So the two of you, I'm happy
and
to
Murphy.
chat.
Yep.
And Murphy too. Well, nice.
It's going to be fun.
So which book would you recommend others try then? This could be something that's lesser known, something you just adore, something that's new, old that you've read.
let's see. This is the part I didn't prepare for. Okay, so the first one that is going to be on my top 10 this year that I'm going to tell everybody to read that's outside of the fantasy genre is Augustus by John Williams. It was an incredible, incredible read this year. And then for indie, I think one of my top indie reads of the year is definitely The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan. I'm obsessed. I've read all 3 books that are out in this series now, and I'm just, it's one of those series where you read it and then you come back to the next book and you feel like you're going home. And I love that feeling so much. And I'm so glad that I found it again this year with a new series. So that was very exciting.
I couldn't agree more with that. I am actually holding off on book 3 because I want the audiobook, and it's coming
so
out
good.
soon. It's coming out soon.
Yes.
We have Madison.
Hi,
Hey.
Mads.
And just a quick comment here from Joshua. Virginia Woolf is incredible. Have you ever read Mrs. Dalloway?
This is my first official foray into Virginia Woolf. So I decided to start with this one because this is the one that I probably have heard mentioned the most, and it was shorter. So I liked when it was, I like things that are a bit of a taste test. I'm also used to fantasy. So like, you know, I'm used to much longer books. So it's shorter. But yeah, it's good so far.
That's like a palate cleanser for fantasy readers.
It is. You know, it's funny though, because this has actually taken me longer to get through than some of the fantasy books I've read in the last couple of months because there's just so much there.
Yes.
And just kind of letting myself slow down a little bit and pay attention to what she's saying is a good exercise that I try to do at least multiple times a year.
It is important. Yes. So are there any new to you authors, aside from Virginia Woolf, you'd like to potentially start reading more of, get into, maybe a completely new author? And how did they get in your radar?
Well, I'm going to shout out what may end up being my series of the year, and that is Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham.
Right.
This one I was introduced to by, there's a few booktubers that I'm friends with that are big fans of this. Ponderings of Pete, big fan of it. Alan is a big fan of it. And I picked it up and started reading and was just absolutely blown away immediately. And I think I was on book 2 of the 4, and I literally went and bought everything else that Daniel Abraham has written up to this point.
Oh, wow.
Minus his newest one, just because I was like, this is an incredible writer and I want to read everything he's written now. So really, and for anybody that's a Malazan fan, if you haven't read LPQ and you're a Malazan fan, that's not okay. And it's not the same, like, it's small, it's not as like vast in scope as Malazan, but just the vibes are somewhat similar. It's not quite as dark as Malazan, but it is definitely incredible. Okay. Yeah.
I've got book 1 around here somewhere.
So good.
I'll have to prior. I know I've heard so many booktubers talk about it, but for me, it kind of got to the point where it was like so many people were talking about it. I could get some breath, right?
Yep, I totally get that.
So, but nice to hear the comparison to Malazan, because that gives me something to think on, right?
In terms of just how rich it is and how much is there.
Okay.
Definitely a different writing style, but yeah. Matt's got his bingo card out. Sorry.
No, that's good. Madison here as well. It happens. Read-alongs are so 100%. Hard. We were doing the Malazan read-along with a bunch of us, Bryce, Andrew. We all kind of fell off the bandwagon. So, you know, Joe took a shot. Good on ya. So let's go ahead and dive right into your writing, because I have a lot of questions about this aspect, and I feel like we could probably go down a little bit of a hole here. So you've talked about it before with being a young author, and I'm really curious to know how the writing experience for you has changed from a youth to an adult.
Well, an easy answer to that would be the intentionality, because when I was very young, I was just wide-eyed and just like threw myself into everything I was writing, and just, you know, there wasn't as much of like an editing process and all that kind of stuff, because I was, you know, 12, 14 when I started. And I was just kind of exploring, and I think that in my early years, my journey into writing and my learning the craft and learning my voice as an author was published. Because I feel like a lot of people have that journey, but it's, you know, it's the manuscript that's been in the box for, you know, 20 years that they like, oh yeah, I started with this series or whatever it is.
Right.
Mine was just
I'm
documented
100%
and
Madison. Sorry.
published everywhere. No, you're fine. And yeah, so I think now that foundation was incredibly important to where I'm at now as a writer, and just I think I've learned a lot of things that I feel like I have a little bit of a head start in terms of what to expect as having a career as a writer, because this is my
Right.
kind of second go round. Yeah, I think the biggest thing though was there was a little bit of me that kind of felt like I had something to prove now that I was an adult, to say I'm not just a commodity. Like, is that because, you know, even though a lot of people loved my writing back then, you get to a point where you're like, but is it a commodity kind of thing where it's like, wow, like a 14-year-old is selling a book that she wrote. That's so cool, which it is.
Yeah.
But then getting to an adult, there was that little bit of nerves that was like, am I actually a good writer? Or like, now I feel like I can't hide behind anything anymore.
It's a whole other level of imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. It also gave me a bit of I think I'm coming into it with a little bit of a thicker skin, which maybe is a good thing, because I got through a lot of my naysayers back then that I'm just like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say those are some big differences, but I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to start my writing journey so much earlier, because I honestly would not be here without all of the things I learned from then up until now.
Right. Okay. All right. And how much time was there in between publishing as a youth to an adult, between Phased and the series you had written before?
So Phased I published in 2020. And I think the last fiction that I published before that, I was 17. So
Okay.
that's a 10, 11-year gap.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So college, got married, had children, was raising the
Life.
children. Yeah. And I think my youngest was probably about 3 by the time I started, like 3 or 4 by the time I realized, like, okay, I'd really like to
Yeah.
get back into this. So
That's a nice age compared to like newborn, toddler stage. They're a little bit more independent at that point.
mhm.
So yeah, I could definitely see that as a bit of a breather for you
Yeah.
and rediscovery.
Yeah.
So from everything that you've read, or even just maybe interviews you've watched, because you also do interviews as well
Mhm.
yourself, I'd love to know if there are any authors that helped inspire your writing or have helped you craft your writing over the years.
Yeah, in terms of the author interviews I've done, I would say one of the things I love about it so much is that I learn. This is kind of a cheesy answer, but I honestly do learn something from every author I get to talk to. And I think that's something that I really love about it, because everybody's process is so different, and their starting points are so different, and their inspirations, you know, are coming from all over the place. And I always really enjoy that. I think when I was younger, um, authors, in terms of what I was reading, inspiration.
Even, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
what were there books that you read that you, like, looked at that world building or that aspect of
Mhm.
the writing craft and you went, "Yeah, that's
Yeah.
gonna help me."
In terms of books, I've been very inspired by a lot of different storytelling mediums. So film, series, music, poetry, novels. I think when I was very young, Jack London's White Fang is one that I go back to every time when I
Mm.
talk about inspirations. That one was a huge inspiration when I was younger. I read tons of horse books. Oh my goodness. I'm pretty sure if it's a horse series that was published prior to like 2006, I've probably read it.
That's fair.
Read a ton of those because that was my whole personality when I was 14 was horses, which is better than a lot of other things it could have been, I suppose.
Yeah, that's
But
good in comparison.
right. I mean, I was introduced to Narnia through the old BBC live action adaptation of it, and that was a really big influence. I can't even remember how many times I watched that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Getting into college is when I started seeing, like, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley was a big influence on me, and Edgar Allan Poe, honestly, a little bit
Oh,
even.
wow. Yeah.
I read Mask of the Red Death for the first time in intro to fiction class, and there were just so many different aspects of the fantastic that were with a lot of different tones and styles, and it all just kind of got put in a blender for inspiration, I think.
Well, yeah, and I mean, everything kind of jumbles together at a certain point, but it's interesting to see where authors take their inspiration from and how they take that and make it their own into their own stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, I love this comment. A Court of Thorns and Horses.
I that should have been the title of my chapter book series when I was younger.
Could have
I'll have to
started a
go
trend.
rename them. Yeah. Yeah.
We have a few people joining us. Derek,
Hey,
we've
Derek.
got I cannot pronounce this. I am so sorry. ZK, I'm gonna call you ZK unless you have a name you prefer. I'm so sorry. And we've got Palmer here as
Hey,
well.
Palmer.
Hello, everyone. Joe has actively looked for those books as well.
Yep. They're not easy to find. They're all my parents have boxes of a lot of them still, but they're all out of print, like my website and everything from those days. I mean, there was such a huge gap, and I just couldn't keep up with keeping it all going back then. And also, I'm at a point now where I appreciate the opportunity to start a different chapter, and I have a different name now because I'm married, and so it was kind of a natural like that's always going to be a huge part of who I am as a writer, but I'm ready to be the adult version of me now. But
Yeah.
I mean, if you find them, there's some on eBay that are signed from like 12, 14, 15 years ago that are still on eBay. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
There you go. There you go, Joe. Go
Yep.
a hunting. Shelley and Poe are top dogs. Absolutely. Hello, Corey. Thanks for
Hey,
joining
Corey.
us. And congratulations as well here.
Thanks, Matt.
That's awesome. And yes, Mythology Press is Palmer Pickering.
The Palmer Pickering.
Yes.
The Palmer Pickering. Yes.
So let's talk about the Bloodstones. Let's use that transition. Congratulations from Matt to transition here, because I was so excited when I finished reading that book, and I had so many questions. So
Let's go.
Let's start from the beginning. Where did the idea for the story and the world come from?
Well, the world has been around a lot longer than this particular story has. When I was in college, I had just fresh come out of my gateway into epic fantasy, and I had read Mistborn, and I had read the Hammer of God trilogy by Karen Miller, and then I picked up Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson, and was just instantly. I mean, I was like 21 and just 20 something in there, and just it was so unlike anything I had ever read, and just the scope of it was so just incredible to me. And I didn't understand half of what I was reading at the time because I was brand new to epic fantasy. But it was just incredible. It was such a huge expansion of what I believed was possible in fantasy. And I started scribbling, and we were renting a house because we got married. My husband and I got married after freshman year of college, and we were renting a little house next to the campus. And in the upstairs, we had this little landing before you went into the bedrooms, and I had pages just taped all over the walls of this landing. I had timelines, I had like mood board photos, and I had like snippets of things and maps, and I started just building a world and putting things together and started to write a little bit of a manuscript in this world that I was creating, and wrote a whole like 100,000 word manuscript for book 1 of the series that at the time was called Edge of the Earth, which is still going to be the second series after Bruhai. And then I just kind of putzed at it for a long time. I did it as a creative project for my English major senior capstone project. And then just kind of, I tried to come back to it a few times over the years. But again, once I had kids, and I could tell I wasn't ready to write this caliber of a story just yet. And then last year I came back to it and started digging back into, okay, I need to figure out more of the backstory of what happened before Edge of the Earth. And that's where Legends of the Bruhai came in.
Okay.
Because I wanted to write the story of the characters who would be the legends and the myths in Edge of the Earth.
Oh, I see.
So
I see
Legends
where
of the
that would
Bruhai.
So there's the trilogy, and then there's going to be potentially a series after it.
Yes, that is the
Very nice.
original one that I started back in college. Yeah. And there's
Very
going to
nice.
be a little novella in between the two series that is going to go back about 3,000+ years in the world and explain a little bit more of the magic system. So,
Oh, so when is that?
I've no idea. After Legends of Bruhai is out.
That's fair. And we have a question here. How do
Yeah.
we pronounce the name of the world?
Drillar.
Drillar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And that's the map actually that's in the inside of the book. Was done by my best friend Sarah, as was the cover. But the original map was very close to this. And I drew, I don't know if that's going to show up. There we go. A little bit. I drew the original map of this 12 years ago, and it's very close to the original, which is pretty cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that. So speaking of the world building, are you still exploring the world building as you write, or do you have everything nailed down? You know exactly what's going on? No.
No, I admire authors. I always love getting to talk to authors who are very strict planners, because I really admire that skill set a lot.
Yeah.
I am not that type of a writer at all. I have a lot of it just kind of in my head, but I don't sit down and if it's relevant to what I'm writing in that moment, then I'll dig into it a little bit. But I'm a big believer in the fact that world building for world building's sake is, for me at least, cool to an extent. But if it doesn't have a point, or it doesn't support the story in some way, then I don't want to spend a ton of time on it.
Right.
But if it's relevant to the story, which a lot of it is, then that's what I try to dig into. So I try to keep it pretty character and story centric.
And so that makes sense. And we have a question here as well. Andrew Meredith is doing the audiobook.
Yes, he is.
Or am I pulling that out of thin air? There you go.
He is recording it as we speak.
And so I know the timing of that release is going to be a little bit different, right? From the paperback and hardcovers, or
so
no,
the paperback and ebook will come out on November 28th. And then Andrew is working on the audiobook right now, and we don't have a solid for sure date yet, because we wanted to make sure that he had enough time to really do it justice how he wanted to perform it and not feel rushed.
Of course.
So it's not going to be much longer than November 28th. So it'll still probably be out this year, but not probably right on the 28th.
That sounds good. So I am really curious, because you've written 2 different genres, right? Between Phased and the Bloodstones. What was your experience like writing between those different genres? Was it similar? Did you learn a lot about yourself as a writer this time around compared to last time? All the questions.
Yes. Yes to all of those. Phased was a very personal project. And for me, exploring trauma and bonds, like relationship bonds, is all there. That's always going to be at the heart of every story I write, because that's just a main part of I think what I lean into as an author.
Mm.
So there are definitely some similar theme threads between the two, but Val and Lila's story in Phased is much more contained. It's a very caged story, because that's how they are experiencing reality. They're very caged. They're in this very kind of cut off situation from the rest of their world, and so the world building and stuff is lighter, because there's just not as much that they're privy to.
Mm.
Um, and I'm going to expand that a little bit now in the sequel, hopefully maybe next year. Don't quote me on that. But I really had to lean on a lot of the world building that I've been doing over the past decade with Bloodstones, because when you pull back on a world that is that much bigger, and there's now you're working on multiple countries, and you're working with, you know, the politics systems in all of these different countries, and the warfare between, and the, you know, the economy between all these different countries. I mean, it's just such a, it's overwhelming trying to just keep all the threads straight as you're working on it. So with Phase, that was a lot less difficult, and it was still very intentional in terms of the themes and how I was portraying the characters. But Bloodstones just required me to utilize everything I've learned about craft from the books I've read and the books I've written in the last 18 years since I started.
Very nice. Yeah, it's a far bigger scope
Yes.
in that case. And
very much so.
did you find it an easy enough transition with the genres? Because there are some differences with the genres.
For sure. Urban fantasy was something that I think, coming back to fiction after a decade away from it, I didn't want to set myself a hurdle that I wasn't ready for yet. And I think keeping it urban allowed me to explore themes that at the time were incredibly relevant and really personal to me, but without having the stress of puppeteering a world of that size.
Right.
And so, I mean, Phased, I would not have been able to write Bloodstones, I think, without having written Phased first, because that was such a necessary craft step for me to come back to fiction, to really find my voice again, and then expand and see what I could do with it in the Bloodstones.
I love it. And you said there's a sequel to Phased?
There is going to be a sequel to Phased. It's going to be a duology. The second one is called True Blood, and I do have a partial working manuscript for it already.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah.
I think if ever you watch this, I think I saw you comment the other day that if ever there was a sequel for Phased, well, there you go.
Yeah, I'm glad. It's been really fun to see Phased kind of start to garner a little bit of a following, because you know, it's a little bit of an uphill battle, because when you say, especially if you categorize it in the YA section of things, it's a YA supernatural fantasy, which a lot of people immediately have strong assumptions about what kind of story that will be. And Phased is not that at all. Like, it's my kind of rebuttal to the toxic supernatural romance genre that I grew up watching everybody read.
Right. Yeah, I see what you
And
mean.
yeah, and it's been fun to see people be very surprised by it when they read it. That's honestly been a huge I don't know what the right word is for that. It's been a good balm for me, having written it and it having been such a personal project, to see people be really surprised by the story that's in it, in a good way.
Well, and I think that's something that's really hard to pull off, is taking a trope or a story that's commonly done one way and flipping it on its head and having it done successfully, that readers actually go, "Oh, dang, okay.
Yeah, that's
All right."
different.
That's different.
Yep.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
the other way where they're like, "Oh, well,
Well, that
that
didn't work.
awkward moment."
Right.
But no,
Yeah.
that's great. I know
Yeah.
I personally love seeing that when you surprise when an author can surprise me in that way, it's always a good day.
100% agree.
We have a quick question here from Corey as well. He
Mhm.
said the originally planned book was 100K. Can you say how big Bloodstones is and
Mhm.
how many books we may be looking at?
I'm going to grab my second copy because it's just easier. So this one is 100 and just under 150,000 words. So it is officially the longest book I've ever written now, which I really have to give a shout out to the fantasy authors that write the 200, 300, 400,000 word books, because I don't know how y'all do it at all. But yeah, it's about 150,000. And in this group, it's going to be a trilogy of 3 books that will be a contained story with threads that will lead forward into the second series. So it's not like it's going to end on a cliffhanger or anything like that. But it will definitely have some major tie-ins to the next series.
Love it. I love the breadcrumbs, right? The threads and everything, being able to track them. Katie here. I'm
It's
sorry, I
true.
just love this comment.
Yep.
And
There's no more blood in the titles of the other books of Bruhai, at least. So
there you go. Derek, I'll admit I was expecting something a lot more
Mhm.
Twilight-ish when I first saw Phase, but hearing Tori and others talk about it got me excited to check it out. Absolutely. And we have Mike here. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Mike.
Welcome. So we have a question from Twitter, because
Okay.
for those who don't know, I posted on Twitter today saying if you had questions for Tori, pop them in. So we do have one from Chris Fisher saying, I'd like
Hi,
to know
Chris.
how Tori comes up with her characters. Do
Mm.
they come organically as she processes the story, or are they planned out, and does the story evolve around them?
Yes to the last question. I'm a very character focused reader and writer. Um, the characters, usually they're some of the first pieces of the story that show up. So when I first get a spark of an idea, it's usually about, so for example, with Bloodstones, I had this idea that I wanted to write about a group of kind of a motley crew, because it's one of my favorite tropes, motley crew of boys who were trained to be essentially like super soldiers, assassins, what have you. And I started thinking about that. And as I was kind of allowing that story or group of character ideas to sift, Garen, who's the main POV you meet right away in the beginning of the story, started to materialize, and I started working my way backwards. Okay, where did he come from? What is his family? Who, like, how did he get to be in this position? Is he noble? Is he, low class in this society? Is he? You just start asking all of these questions and working your way back to the point where you're like, this is where this started. And the first chapter of the Bloodstones I wrote back in June 2022, and that image of that first scene was just so incredibly vibrant in my head, because once I had my character, all of a sudden the world started exploding around him, and I could see this character and what had happened to him, and why he is where he is. Um and that scene, I think the first scene of a series like this is so incredibly important, not just as a hook, but for me it's a promise of what is this whole series like. You're starting the whole trilogy or the whole series from this one point, and that needs to mean something. So yeah, I don't know if that made any sense, but that's kind of how that started.
No, it absolutely did. Yeah, it's a great question because I'm always fascinated by how authors come up with these stories, right?
Yeah.
How do you come up with the ideas, the world building, the characters, and then put it into a cohesive story in writing that makes sense to not just you but to other people?
Blood, sweat, and
Um,
tears.
yeah, there you go.
I mean, it's true. There's so many days when I just sat down and cried because I was so
Oh,
frustrated. And I think that's like Ernest Hemingway has that quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's the quote about writing's the easiest thing in the world. You just sit down at a typewriter and bleed. Like the idea that it
yeah.
it takes something from the author to create something of this magnitude, like an artistic piece of this. And it's not just with authors, obviously. Any artist
Mhm.
puts something of themselves. It's a cost that obviously we're all too willing to pay because it's worth it. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot of thinking and sitting and just letting the story kind of build in your mind. And when I hit walls with characters, I usually find that it's because I don't know them well enough. And so then I have a sit and I'm like, all right, so I'm going to sit Garen across from me and we're going to have a conversation so that I can figure out what I'm missing and what I don't know about him yet that I need to.
I love it. And then there were some characters that were easier for you to write.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so. There's a character you meet in part 2 of Bloodstones named Sindri, and she is as Matt so lovingly put it, she's just kind of a badass, and she's a warrior, and she's a very impulsive, reckless kind of character. And there was kind of a just a headlong rush of writing her, that her scenes were a lot more I wouldn't say they were easy per se, but she just flowed right off the page immediately. Whereas with Garen, I needed to spend a little bit more time with him and really figure out who he was underneath all those layers, because he has a lot of layers to him as the story goes on.
There we go.
Yes, 100%. All of that is true.
And
Yep.
get your side eye ready there, because Andrew, hello.
Man himself. Yeah.
Awesome.
With Sindri, one of the things that I love subverting tropes. I love
Mm.
subverting things. And so there's quite a few characters in the Bloodstones that were me having read a certain archetype of character that I was ready to just take and twist it and change it and make it a little bit darker or different, or take it in a different direction. And Sindri is definitely, I got tired of reading very one-dimensional, strong female characters.
Yeah.
And I wanted a character who, at first glance, she's a warrior, she's powerful, she's bloodthirsty, she's a strong female character, when in fact, she's actually very weak in a lot of ways. And she makes a lot of dumb decisions, and she's impulsive, and like sometimes it bites her in the butt and she has to deal with the consequences. And like, so I wanted her to be more than just, badass with a sword. I wanted her to be very nuanced and not always make smart decisions or be the hero of everything. And, yeah.
So, and we have this here.
Inside joke. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I figured. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but it seems important.
Yes.
Rob, we have a question from you. Do you normally develop characters by pulling from media you've read, seen, or do you pull from the real life as well?
Yes to both. I think I'm very, like, I can point to a group of characters that inspired Garen, and I can point to groups of characters that inspired parts of Sindri, and also pulling in that from, on the other side, my real life experience with myself and people around me. Phased is very directly based. The main characters are very directly based on myself and my best friend and like other people that we know. And what's fun about that is I can literally call her and say, okay, so this just happened in the story, how would you react? And then I can just like use that into, all right, and then that's what I write into the character. That's not the normal way that I don't usually go quite to that extent with characters that I pull from real life. So usually it's more of a kind of, like I said before, kind of a blender of a bunch of different characters and people, and all mushed into one and their own person.
I love it. Take inspiration from everywhere.
Absolutely.
So I haven't read Phased yet.
I'm so excited.
I feel like I'm gonna walk away a little hurt.
Probably. Most people do. Yeah, most people do.
I will prepare my heart with chocolates.
Perfect. Andrew Wizard, I said that a blanket and a good bowl of ice cream was helpful.
Oh, you know what? I've got a huge tub of ice cream. I'm good.
Perfect.
So one thing I did notice though is that just from hearing you talk about it, the description of phase, and then having read the Bloodstones, you have an overlapping theme, which
Mhm,
is sisterly and brotherly
mhm,
bonds. Whether it's a
mhm,
motley crew or relationship, either way,
mhm.
you write a lot around those themes.
I do.
And I'm really curious if this is intentional, if it was a happy surprise. Did you just kind of sit down and go, yeah, sounds like fun, or this works, right?
I definitely think that whether it's subconscious or conscious, that authors often include themes that mean a lot to them in the works that they write, and you can tell a lot about an author based on what they're writing. Um, I grew up as an only child, and I was homeschooled and an only child, and so a lot of like found family has always been a big deal for me in life because I kind of had to build my sibling bonds outside of my biological family. Um, and I really struggled with friendships for a really long time when I was younger and didn't really start for a lot of reasons, but didn't really start getting like the lifelong bonds like Sarah I met when I was 14 and we've been, best friends for almost 20 years now. And she was kind of the start of that, to be honest, and that's where the sister bond from Phased comes in, and there's another sister bond in the Bloodstones with Sindri and her sister Senna,
Mhm.
and it feels very natural for me to write at this point because Sarah and I could not be closer if we were biological siblings, so
Aw.
it's just a natural thing, and they just kind of show up at this point. But my friends have always been like, I've spent a long time without having really deep close friendships, and so now I value them so much, and that's my motley crew. Like, my friends are my found family, and I value them very highly. So I think that's a theme that just constantly comes out in my writing.
Yeah, well, it calls to my heart because I was in the same position as you, only child, struggled to make long-term
Mhm.
friendships. It's hard when you're an
It's
only
hard.
child.
Yep.
Socializing with your peers doesn't happen until later in life,
Mhm.
right? Like, whereas when you're little, you might be 2 and then have a sibling or
Right.
be born and there's already siblings. You
Right.
know?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I definitely appreciate that because it's a struggle.
It
It's a
is.
struggle to develop.
And I think the beautiful part about it is just that, when you have spent a large part of your life or growing up without that, it makes
Mhm.
you have a whole new appreciation for them when you do find them. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Only children unite. Yes, Matt.
Yeah.
Okay, so we also have a question here from Joshua. I love your approach to getting to know your characters. Would you consider yourself more of a discovery writer when it comes to plot? I'm always interested in this with epic fantasy.
Thanks, Joshua. And yes, to my detriment sometimes. um, uh, yeah, I'm very much a discovery writer. I usually have, so if I think of my favorite stories, film, books from my whole life, the emotional impact moments are really the pieces that stick with
Mm,
me every time. And that's how I write too, where I have these big moments of impact through the story. And then I have to figure out how to get to each of them.
right.
So that's kind of how I start. I don't outline much. I have in the past, like I've dabbled with outlining, but when I sat down to try to outline for Bloodstones, it was like pulling my hair out. Like, it was so stressful, and I couldn't, it was so like not working for this project at all. And thankfully, I have some incredible writing friends. Andrew Meredith in the chat is one of them, who were very willing to listen while I brainstorm outline. So I'm a talk it out person, and being able to talk through the outline is actually way more helpful for me because once
Hmm.
it's in my head, I can write it. I don't need to put it on an outline page, but I have to be able to see it in my head almost like a film scene, and then
Hmm.
I can go from there.
Interesting. So you go through the whole visualization of it and then put it down.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
like
which
it.
is weird because I discovered through this project actually that I don't hear anything. It's all visual. There's no auditory anything for me when I'm writing. I listen to music, but in my own mind, I don't hear any of the story. I just see it, and I can see what they're saying, and I can see what setting they're in. Because when Andrew came to me to do the audiobook, one of the first questions he asked me was, well, okay, so can you tell me, can you give me some examples of voices that you think sound like these, certain characters? And I suddenly realized I had no idea what my characters sounded like. I was like,
Oh, wow.
I don't know. So that was kind of a fun little excursion, was just randomly listening to a bunch of different actors and actresses from all sorts of different movies and trying to like, well, what would Garen sound? I don't know what Garen sounds like. What would he sound like?
So that's so interesting because as a reader, and I want to ask you this, as
Yeah.
a reader, do you hear voices when you're reading, like as the characters, or is it all your own voice or just nothing?
Nothing.
That's
No,
fascinating.
it's all
I
visual.
I hear it like a full cast in my head.
Mm,
So, or if it's like a single POV, it's just in that character's. So it's
I
really
wish I
interesting
could
to
do
me.
that. I wish.
I mean, there are struggles with it. So if I start reading a paperback and then I like, let's say I read book one in a series and then I realize, oh, hey, there's audiobooks. Can't do it.
Ah, yep.
Cannot continue in an
See, I don't have
audiobook.
that problem.
There, see? Well, there you
Yeah.
go.
Once I've heard an audiobook, then that's what they sound like, of course. So like now it's
Right.
kind of cool because Andrew he's creating the voices for my characters now, and that's the way I'm hearing them. And like hearing him read, so I heard the first chapter of it recently, which was a very surreal, cool experience. And Andrew's an amazing narrator, and hearing Garen's child voice for the first time made me cry, because it was like this moment where
Oh,
it just added a level of clarity to his character that I hadn't had before, and it was just perfect. And I was just, oh my gosh, he's so precious.
oh, that's
So that was
awesome.
pretty cool.
I'm curious how that will impact your writing moving forward now.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll
You
find
will.
out. I mean, it's I'm I think it's going to be fine. Like, I have to be very plugged into the like, one of the fastest ways for me to bring up the mood of my stories when I sit down to write is I have a playlist for every book that I write. Phased has a playlist, Bloodstone has a playlist. I already have started one for the second book, and I put on the music and I'm there. And that's why I'm very careful to curate the songs that
Interesting.
really pull the mood and the feeling that I'm going for.
So I am curious, and I'm gonna ask another follow-up question to this
Yeah.
because I know you have music background as well.
Hmm.
Is that an influence to
Oh
that?
yeah,
Yeah?
for
Okay.
sure. I'm a music nerd. Like, I love I one of my favorite things is when people come to me and say, "Hey, Tori, can you make me a playlist?" I love it. I love it.
Oh,
Like,
nice.
I have like 85 playlists on my Spotify. I have
Gosh.
like I'm such a nerd. I look for new music on a daily, sometimes basis, where I
Wow.
just listen to all sorts of genres and all sorts of artists, from very well known to almost nobody's ever heard of them. And
Wow.
so, yeah, I'm kind of a nerd about it.
Alright, well, I'm submitting my ticket, request.
Yay! Yeah, like if somebody comes and tells me, "Hey, here's a couple of artists that I like, or styles, genres that I like," then I can kind of curate something that's similar and maybe gives them a few new pieces that might be a little outside the comfort zone, but still somewhat similar. So,
I
yeah.
love it, I love it. And, so I just wanna go through the chat here because 'cause we've got
Yeah.
a couple comments, as well. So, here we have Dan with,
Thanks,
"Tori, you
Dan.
cultivated such an amazing sibling bond in Bloodstones in just a few short chapters." 100%. I was so impressed because you invest readers like, I was invested really quick.
I mean, that's a big deal for me. I'm a so I have ADD, but I also read that way. So like, if you haven't like give me a character that I
Mm,
can latch onto in the first chapter or two, I will keep reading. It's not like I
mhm.
give up, but I struggle more with, I'm like, give me a character that I can just be like, "Oh yeah, I'm invested in this," even if it changes throughout the book.
Yeah.
So with Bloodstones, I mean, I rewrote the first chapter probably 8 to 10 times.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
because it had to be perfect. Because I was like, this is Garen's entrance, and this sets up the not just this book, but the entire trilogy, and that's a big deal.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. That's grueling
yeah,
work, though.
yeah. I
Well, we've
do
got
have to say, in response to Dan's comment too,
yeah.
being a mom, I now have a immediate case study of sibling bonds because I have 3 children, and so a lot
Yes.
of that is now being added to my own experience with found family bonds, and I'm kind of getting a chance to round all of that out. So
Yeah.
shout out to my children for being helpful.
Oh, I love it, and that's a beautiful way to look at it too. We also have another only child,
Yay.
go Bex. And, let's see, Tori, we have a question from Matt. What is your
Ooh.
dream casting for Garen, Sindri, and Zario and Lohi? Mario, can we just say Mario?
We're
Like
just gonna call him Mario from now on. Yeah, Mario Helix.
yes.
Garen is so tough. Um, there's a Korean actor that I think the thing with Garen is it's not just the visual for me. It's more about the emotional depth that Garen has to portray through the story. And I think as the older version of him, there's a Korean actor named Yo Jingu who is incredibly gifted in that he's in a Netflix drama called The Crowned Clown, which is phenomenal. If anybody ever wants to watch a K drama, that is an excellent starting point. It's a historical piece, and he plays kind of a Prince and the Pauper
Oh, okay.
role and plays 2 characters, and it's brilliant. Um,
Wow.
so I would say in terms of like emotional range, I would think about him. Sindri's tough. Um, she's much older than Sindri is in the book, but a character I would say a character that I can point to as one of the kind of inspiration pieces for Sindri would be Olga Kurilenko, who played Etane in the movie Centurion. She plays a mute Celtic warrior, and just that portrayal has always really stuck with me. I thought she was incredible in that film. Very underrated performance, I think. But she's quite a bit older than Sindri is, but I love her as an actress. So I
Which
don't know
doesn't
how helpful
matter.
that is, right? Zario, probably there's quite I can point to a couple of actors. One that I can think of right away is McKenyu, who plays Zoro in the new One Piece. He's also
Okay.
my favorite character in the Rurouni Kenshin live adaptations, which are some of my favorite films ever. And again, the emotional range that he has is just amazing. One Piece is okay in terms of seeing what he can do as an actor, but if you watch the Rurouni Kenshin films, it's incredible. Loey, I don't know about Loey. Loey would be a tough one to cast because he's something. I'm trying to think.
So just offhand, the first actor that comes to my mind is Ian McKellen,
Oh, I mean, yes. If
right?
Loey was Western European,
Right?
150%.
That
Ian
that acting
Ian
skill.
McKellen would be amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
could
just
totally pull it off.
yeah, that I know that's like but yeah, that
Love
acting
it.
skill.
I love Ian McKellen.
Same.
He's so awesome.
I know so few actors, but that's the one that's the one
That's
I
a, if
know.
you I mean, that's a good one to know, I think.
Yes. Let's see. Just gonna keep going through here. So we have could a Bloodstones playlist be released for those who like to listen to the music while reading?
So, fun story about that because I'm such a nerd and I love sharing my music playlist. If you go to my website, which is toritecken.com,
Mhm.
and you go to the Bloodstones and or the Phased pages, my Spotify playlists are actually linked right like there's a little drop-down box on the side of the page where you can listen to the songs.
Link in the description of this
Mhm.
video.
So yes,
There you go.
absolutely you can listen to the playlists.
All right, and we have yep, absolutely. I
I
love
love it.
hearing the playlists as well. Yeah. So, yeah, Chris, absolutely.
Mhm. Thanks,
Huge fan.
Chris. I was very happy with where it ended up.
So something I wanted to dive into as well, and we won't go into detail,
Sure.
but I did want to ask how about how you go about getting readers invested early on.
Mm.
How do you do that? Is it a formula? Is it something you discover as you do, or is it those like 8 to 10 revisions?
Partially, yes. I think especially in Bloodstones, well, and I mean even Phased. Phased originally started in a spot that was a horrible opening, and thank goodness for my
Mm.
editor because she was like, I don't know that this is a great place to open. I was like, you're right. And I think for me at least, in a lot of the stories that really matter to me, I'm immediately thrown into a point of vulnerability with a
Mm.
character. And that's something that you find in both Phased and Bloodstones. In the very beginning, when we meet Val for the first time in Phased, she's in a very
Mm.
vulnerable position. She's trapped. She's being forced to phase into her werewolf form. Literally, it's not a spoiler. It's literally like the first paragraph of the book.
Yeah.
So for anybody freaking out, and in Bloodstones, you have this very young child who is witnessing an execution. Like
Mm.
there's a huge open vulnerability there that invites the reader to, like, it's a little bit of an intake of breath, and you're immediately like,
Mm.
well, that's not normal. or
Yeah.
like or that's not like, especially with Garen being a young boy at the very beginning of the book, what I was hoping is to instill uh, a need, that kind of protectiveness in the reader, and also the
Mm.
investment of, this is a foundational core memory for him now. Like, this
Yeah.
is, that's a big deal to witness at age 11. Um, what does that have to do with the rest of the story? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think moments of vulnerability would be my big answer to that. Is I try to bring the reader in immediately and show them this is the raw, honest, open,
Mhm.
vulnerable. Like, you're right there with the character. I'm not holding anything back from you. I'm not trying to, like, I don't want to info dump on my readers right away, because to me,
Right.
that stuff can come. Like, you can figure, we'll get there later, but I want you to know who you're going to be with in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just along those lines, is that something you start drafting after you figured out the character or as you figure out the character?
A little bit of both. I
Okay.
think that's one of the reasons why I revised the opening so many times, is because as I
Mm.
got to know Garen better and better, in the very initial drafts, he was very emotionless because I hadn't figured out the deeper parts of who he was as a character yet.
Right. Okay.
And every time I got a little bit further into his character and exposed a little bit more of who he was and also who he was going to become, it
Mm.
allowed me to bring more of that into the scene.
I love it. I just have a couple comments here we're going to
Yeah.
go through. It's interesting that you say you're not a planner because how the
Mhm.
story unfolds, gradually adding pieces to
Yep.
this world. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Seconded by Andrew here. I was thinking the same thing as I'm reading it. I'm thinking so much setup and tear down. I'm continually impressed.
I think
Absolutely.
it's kind of an intuitive thing, and I really have to credit the incredible storytellers that I've been inspired by with that, because I just go back, I lean back on the stories that have really left an impact on me, and why, and what, how did they approach those moments that were very deep and impactful and emotional, and just kind of go from there.
I love it. And we also have Sarah with us as well. Hello, hello. So, speaking of storytelling,
Yes.
let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay. Our books are not gritty at all.
Well, I'm curious though because I I would, wrong metaphor then.
No, no, you're good.
I'm really curious because I can't imagine what it would be like to write a story. I'm
Mhm.
primarily a reader.
Yeah.
When it comes to telling stories, I feel like I'm trash at it. So, one thing I'm curious about is what's important to you in the storytelling aspect as a reader versus an
Mm.
author? Or, yeah, reader versus an author. Is it the same? Do they differ? because it's a completely different experience.
It is. It totally is. And I've had to learn to hang my writer hat at the door to read in a lot of ways. I think that is a learned skill, to be honest. Like as you get, especially as you're finding your voice and you're really like working in the middle of a project. I know a lot of authors who choose to put reading down for a while they're writing, because
Oh,
it's
interesting.
hard not to let that seep into your work. And I totally understand that.
Mhm.
I stay away from certain books when I'm writing if I know that they're more likely to influence. But I think it's largely the same, honestly, because, you know, what really matters to me as a reader is, do I care about this character? Did you make me care about this character? Did you
Mm.
actually make me emotionally enter this story? Because if I read a book where, you know, the best friend of the character dies in the battle and I don't feel anything, that's a big red flag for me. And I think there's a lot of aspects to that and different ways to go about it, but the emotional investment is huge for me. And I don't expect it to happen necessarily on the first page, like with Augustus by John Williams, which is a historical fiction written in like an epistolary letter format through the whole book. It's incredible. That was about, I knew it was an amazing book, but about 2/3 of the way through, he just hit me with this specific scene that was, I just emotionally cracked. And it was like, wow,
Mm.
this is such a huge impact. So I'm willing to give it time, but I want it at some point.
Yeah, before the pivotal moments and
Exactly.
the pa
Earn earn that emotional payoff. That's a big thing for me with authors. If you don't earn that emotional payoff, it's not going to land for me.
Yeah, you're not alone. Myself, I agree, Matt, 100%. The worst thing I
Mhm.
can think about a book is I don't care what happens to these people.
Yep.
It's hard. It's hard because you wanna love the book you're reading,
Yeah.
right? You've
Yep.
spent so much time reading it, you've looked forward to it, you've invested in buying it, made space
Mhm.
for it potentially. It's hard.
Yep. It is
Um,
hard. I
yeah.
hate that feeling.
Don't you harm my hair.
No promises, Dan. No promises.
Well,
I can't
there's
ever promise that about any of my characters. Anybody who's read my books knows that, like, yeah, I'm, you know, you might need a box of tissues and a cozy blanket.
So, we'll do a check-in chat. If you have any questions for Tori, throw them in. We're gonna wrap up with a final, few questions, but definitely throw those questions in. We'll do our best to get to those too. So let's move on to a different format of story, because
Okay.
you've written a short story for the
Yes.
recently successful Kickstarter, The Advent of Winter. Can you talk about that
Yes.
a little bit?
Yeah, honestly, I was shocked. Dom McDermott, who runs Dominish Books here on YouTube, awesome booktuber and reads a lot of indie, he reached out to me and months ago and said, hey, I'm doing this anthology project. I'm just kind of like, you know, brainchild phase with it right now. And would you be interested in joining in as one of the authors? And at the time, I was kind of shocked that he asked me because he'd never read anything I'd written. And I was like, are you sure, Dom? Like, thank you. Yes, of course I want to be involved, but like he took a huge chance on me as an author, and I'm very grateful to him for that, because what a fun project. First of all, so for anybody that doesn't know, it's a anthology of short stories, all based around the theme of winter, whether that's the danger of or beauty of winter. And there's 24 of us. It was designed to be an advent calendar where you'll get one from December 1st to the 24th, short story. And little bit of something for everyone, which is the cool part about having 24 of us involved. And I was in the middle of writing Bloodstones, and man, did I need a creative jostle. Like I was feeling really stuck in some of the parts I was writing. And I decided to just write something completely off the wall, different, something that I had like completely start from scratch, blank slate, and just see what I could come up with. And I'd always wanted to write a necromancer character because I always play that character in all the video games I play. And I wanted to try writing in first person because I've never done that before, because I didn't feel like I had the right character. And so I came up with a bounty hunter who's a necromancer in a fantasy world that is mildly inspired by the Yukon Gold Rush. And it was a absolute blast. I'm so excited for everybody to read it because it was exactly the story that I needed to kind of get me creatively back excited and jazzed up again. So yeah, I'm very excited for everybody to meet Hunter in December. I have no idea which day she's going to be debuting, but it was such a blast.
I love it. I'm so excited too.
I'm
I
so
backed that
excited.
and
I
I was
backed it
like,
too.
yeah. Oh, I love it.
But yeah, there's some really good stories in there. It was cool because I was
Mm.
in the group, the Discord group for it, and getting to see some of the beta drafts of some of the other authors' stories was pretty cool. There's going to be some great stuff in there.
Ooh, nice. A little sneak peek.
See,
I
the short
agree.
story is the easy part, the easy one to pitch. I can do that.
Oh. So, how was it then? Because you said it was kind of a nice little bit of a break for
Mhm.
you. Um, in terms of writing the story, the characters, how was it for you doing all of that in such a short format compared to the 100,000 words we were talking about before?
It was kind of liberating actually
Oh,
because
really?
having the boundary of I had 5,500-ish words to create a world that would hook a reader with my
Mm,
characters. So I was like, okay, all right, like let's put everything I've learned into a completely, and I actually would advocate for every author, if you don't already write short stories, do it just for practice because oh my goodness, I learned so much about how to bring a fantasy world into a tiny little package that was like, here's the important stuff, leave out the stuff that you don't need, really give that character a good punch and make them interesting in a very short amount of time. It was an amazing learning experience.
yeah, that's quite the challenge to up the ante, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It was. Yeah, it was
Have
so much
fun, be
fun.
free, figure it
Right?
out.
Yeah.
So, for anyone who's potentially missed the Kickstarter, is there somewhere else that they can access this anthology later on?
Yeah, so once the like special edition version of the anthology comes out, I think early next year, like February, March at the latest, it will be up for general sale on Amazon. So you will still be able to get the hardcover and paperback version of the anthology. It just won't be the like Kickstarter foily version, but you can still read the stories. So, and I'm not
Great.
sure out to Dom if because I'm not entirely sure, and I should know, but I'm not entirely sure if there's a way you can still jump on for the digital advent calendar or not. So
Okay.
yeah, that might be possible, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that.
So check with Dom at
Check
Diminished
with Dom.
Books.
Yep. Yep.
Rob had to head out, but thank you for stopping in and
Good luck
chatting
on
about
your
that.
launch, Rob.
Yes, congratulations. It's coming up as well. That is Pathlighter coming up in 2 days, I think.
Yeah, it's the 19th or
3 days.
20th. 20th. Yeah.
20th. So
Hmm.
definitely check that out as well. So let's check in with the chat here because we've gotten a few questions. Tori, how far do you know what's going to happen in books 2 and 3? And can you say what I don't
Something about the second.
something
Yeah,
okay,
I think
something
that's
about the
yeah.
second trilogy. I am terrible with acronyms. I'm like an
That's
80-year-old
okay.
woman. I'm sorry.
Um, okay, so yes, I know again, like I because I have those major impact beats
20.
in my head. I have most of those for book two. Book three, I have known the ending of the trilogy since pretty much the start of book one when I started working on book one. I knew where I was going at the very end. Um, the hard part is getting there and figuring out everything in between. So yeah, I know the ending and I know the major plot line of book three and the major plot line of book two. And now it's just coming down to filling in all the gaps and making sure that the story structure flows the right way through those beats, and I'm not forgetting anything. This is the part where I'm going to go back and do a deep dive reread of Bloodstones and just mark everything I need to bring back in book 2 so I don't forget, because you'd be amazed, like eye color and like certain, I mean, the stuff you have to keep track of is just, it's a lot.
So just from you saying that, I feel like you and Crystal Matara would be best buddies. If you've ever followed her like editor and writing journey on Twitter,
I
you
love
see all
her
the
so much. So
tabs.
Crystal was actually one of my alpha readers for Bloodstones,
Yeah.
and she helped me a lot with the emotional and character side of things.
Right.
So yeah, I love Crystal. Crystal's been a huge help in this process. She's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, she's an absolute sweetheart.
I did.
Um, oh yeah. Sorry.
I think I answered half of that. Let's see. Yeah.
Go.
Sorry, Matt.
Go for it. Sorry.
My brain was already off on the next thing. Second trilogy. Yeah. So in the Bloodstones, magic has been essentially kind of disappeared, isn't really the right word, but it's not accessible largely in the world right now for reasons that you will find out in the novella between the two series. And in book 2, it's the magic system is going to be a lot more present, and because it's kind of the shiny new toy, it's how is that going to be used and abused, and how does that fit into a world that has been largely without it for a very, very long time. Even on a small scale, it can be very destructive. So that was kind of the original storyline for book the second trilogy back in college, and more warriors and motley crews and found family and friendship and tearing hearts out and being sad and being so lots more of the same emotions. Yeah.
I love it. So outside of Brew High and Phased, what other projects occupy your brain space on the occasion that may come to fruition in the future? I feel like this is like a little,
this is a lead-in question, because
yeah.
Sarah is the first person to know. Sarah and my husband Ben are the first two people that know all of my story ideas. So True Blood, well, outside of Phased. Okay, so I have a standalone YA that I wrote back in 2014, I think, for NaNoWriMo, that my friends that have known me since college that are writers and readers have said is their favorite thing I've ever written. And I'd like to clean that up and get that out in the near future, because I really love that story. And it's a little trio, motley crew again. And it's a dystopian world. So that one's called Jericho, and that one I definitely want to polish up in the near future. And then the short story for the anthology, I would love to turn into kind of a set of like kind of like the old like serialized Western novels. I'd like to turn Hunter's story into like a little series of shorter novels that detail her life as a necromancer bounty hunter.
That's awesome.
So yeah, definitely some things coming down the pipeline. And I don't know, after that, it'll take me a while to get through all that. So after that, I'm sure we'll have a different idea.
Just, add it to the pile like the TBR list, right?
It's never ending. It's never ending. I've talked about co-writing a couple of books with a couple of people that I won't say much about at this point, because they're just very brainchild. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. Anything's possible.
So we have the ultimate question here from Matt. Garen versus Sindri, who wins?
That's such a mean question, and I love it, but it's I don't know. I think this is going to seem like a cop-out, but I think it really depends on the arena that they're in. If they're on horseback, Sindri's going to kick his butt. And that's just the honest truth. Hand-to-hand combat, probably Garen.
All right. So you got kind of two answers in one there, Matt.
Yeah. I don't know if that Matt might disagree with me, having read the book, but that would be my thought. On horseback, you're not going to beat Sindri.
That's fair. Yeah. And yes, thank you, Chris. It was the 20th for Pathlighter. And actually, Rob is going to be on the channel as well. And I'll be getting to sit down and chat with him too coming
Yay!
up. So definitely tune in for that too. And Derek has a question for you. Do you think that you will continue with the Bruhai before writing phased sequel, or will the phased
Hmm.
or will phase come in between?
That's an excellent question, Derek. I'm not even sure I know the answer to that. I am going to start. So, book 2 of Legends of the Bruhai is called The Queen's Wolf. And I will actually hopefully be starting. I wanted to start working on the prologue for that today, and ended up having to do some like officey type work for the launch. So I am hoping to jump right into Queen's Wolf, simply because with all of the pieces that I'm trying to keep track of in this series, and I want to make sure I don't lose my momentum. I may go back and forth between the two of them at the same time. We'll see what creatively I need, because if I run into a rut with Queen's Wolf and I need to stop and just kind of let it percolate for a while, then it'll be nice to have a completely different project that I'm not going to have to bring, like, I'm not going to feel like I'm bringing anything over from Queen's Wolf to True Blood.
Right.
So that might be a good creative jostle combo, I think. But I will be starting Queen's Wolf hopefully by December, if not sooner.
So basically, surprise, surprise.
Yeah,
Stay tuned.
exactly. Stay tuned. Yeah. I also I don't want to be that person that leaves like a huge amount of time in between
Mm.
books of a trilogy, especially like Bloodstones, because it's a very emotionally charged series and I don't want to make readers like wait forever for the finale. So
Yeah, and you don't it's a happy balance, right? You don't want that, and you don't want to burn yourself out.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm still learning that balance, because I'm, kind of just starting up my career in adulthood now. So I don't have the endless amounts of energy and enthusiasm that I had when I was 14
Right.
anymore. Unfortunately.
Time, such a commodity
Yeah.
when you get
I also have
older.
weirdly more responsibility now that I'm an adult, which is, who'd have thought? So.
So we have quite a few questions here, so we're gonna go through them. What are some of Tori's most emotionally involved SFF reading experiences?
Mm. Most emotionally invested, involved, etc. fantasy books that I've read, or science fiction. Red Rising, the initial trilogy, is my favorite series of all time at this point. Malazan, Book of the Fallen, is right behind that. I would say Dead House Gates, #2, is still my favorite single fantasy book of all time. And that one just was like, ugh, so many emotions with that one. I'm trying to think recently what I have really loved. Um, Mortal Techniques by Rob J. Hayes.
Mm,
Very emotionally invested in those characters.
excellent
Um,
series.
yeah, excellent series. I'm trying to think. Wickwire Watch, hugely emotionally
Mm,
invested in those characters. So, yeah,
lots of them. There's
lots of
lots
them.
of good books there. Chris, I might have missed it. Which character did you enjoy writing the most in Bloodstones?
Um, that's a really tough question, because they're all so different, even in the writing experience. Um, Sindri was the one that flowed the easiest. She was the most natural, because she's an archetype that I've spent a lot of time with, the kind of hot-headed, reckless warrior woman. um, so she was the easiest in terms of I'm most used to being in a headspace like that. Garen was the most rewarding in that I had to work the hardest for him. And I am happy to see that people are really loving um, his character. That's I
Mm.
couldn't be happier, because I put so much work into his character. And then Zario actually was the character that I surprised me the most in writing the story, because I just love him, and it's always so much fun going back to. He's the most like traditional hero archetype character probably of all of them, and it was just he was such a fun character to write.
I love it because Garen was actually my favorite
I
out
love
of all of
Garen.
them, and then Zarya was like my second.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely. And Sarah, we're all excited to see the covers coming up. So
We have planned
absolutely.
out book 2 and book 3 for Legends of the Bruhai, we already have the covers in mind, and you guys, they are going to be like, if you thought the first one was good, oh my goodness, I cannot wait. I can't wait.
You can't just lay out a
I
tease
can.
like that.
I
That's
can. I'll give you guys this. So Sindri is going to be featured on the cover of book 2, which shouldn't be super surprising.
okay. All right.
So yeah,
Okay.
it's gonna be awesome.
And if I remember correctly, Sarah did a character art of Sindri
Yes.
recently.
Yep.
So definitely check that out. Maybe I'll try and get a link to that maybe.
Yes.
Put it in the description if you guys want to check that out because it looked fantastic. Well done, Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah did it. You guys, like this cover, after having been sitting on this world and this story for over a decade, like it's so surreal seeing it actually out now. And the cover it had to be perfect. You know, it was one of those things where it's like, I've waited so long to put this story out there. And like, Sarah just
It looks so
absolutely
good.
did an amazing job on the cover. I'm so happy with it. So it was perfect.
Sorry, I'm just looking at Matt's comment here. Garen, don't ride. Embarrassing gap.
He does ride. Like he's much deadlier than the average Joe on a horse, but Sindri was, yeah, I mean, she's like lives on one, so you know. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a difference between being able to do something and it being your entire
Right.
life and
Yep.
skill set.
Yep.
Yeah.
He'd put up a good fight though, for sure.
Yeah. I believe it. I'm just going through making sure we didn't miss any questions here. And let's see. Sarah here. We had 4 concept sketches in the air before we settled on that layout. I mean, it looks fantastic and it's got the wraparound, right? Because the back
Yes.
also continues on with the scenery.
Yep. Yep. And
Yeah.
that's going to continue throughout the series. We'll have wraparounds for all 3.
I'm gonna apologize in advance.
I'm trying to keep it as spoiler free as possible, Brian.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
All right. Well, aside from that, what else can everyone expect from you in the meantime?
Oh goodness. Well, my stumbling attempt to keep up with my channel as I'm trying to get my books out. But yeah, Advent of Winter coming out starts on December 5th or December 1st with all of the short stories. Bloodstones on November 28th. Sarah and I are in the initial brainchild talks about what the hardcover edition is going to look like for next year. So we will do a hardcover of Bloodstones, and we're just working on what we'd want to put in there for illustrations and all that kind of stuff. So that's going to be really fun.
I'm so excited for that.
And the audiobook. And the audiobook.
And the audiobook.
Yep.
So lots to look forward to. If you haven't already, click the links in the description below to follow Tori, check out her YouTube channel, her books, all the good stuff. Tori, thank you so much for sitting down with me and chatting about your upcoming book and all these projects. It sounds amazing.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm really it was very fitting, I think, that when you asked me, I was like, I'm just so happy that my first Bloodstones interview is going to be with Kay. That's just lovely. I love it. So thanks for having me.
Anytime. And everyone in the chat, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
And yes, Matt, we're going to close off with that because absolutely.
Someday.
And as always, everyone, take care of yourselves.
Bye, guys.